We may be joined by two more members shortly, but welcome, thank you very much for coming. There's no fire alarms planned, so if the fire alarm does start, it's back out through the main entrance and down the ramp. Do we have any apologies for absence?
We've got two, Chair. Councillor Alexander, her substitute is Councillor Eddy, and also Councillor Francis.
Thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest for today's agenda? No? Fantastic. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. There was one typo that I believe Andrew noticed on the minutes from last committee. No? But I think we corrected it anyway. It was just a spelling typo. Anybody else have any issues with the minutes from the last committee? Brilliant. Okay, we'll take that as agreed. Okay, on to item 5, the action sheet. It's one for you. Any actions?
I don't think there were any actions, Chair, on the sheet.
Great. Do we have any appeals for you to tell us about?
Yes, there are 2 appeals that I was just going to provide an update on. The first is in relation to the public inquiry at land at Broomhill and Brislington Meadows. And that's really just to say that the third week of the inquiry took place last week, and the final session for closing submissions is also due to take place tomorrow. This is due to be happening remotely, so will be live streamed, and the link will be available on the council's webpage for the inquiry for anyone who wants to view that. The second I was just going to provide an update on is in relation to the appeal at 149 and 149A and land to the rear of Marksbury Road. Following the publication of the agenda, we have received the inspector's decision for this appeal. It follows a refusal at this committee. The appeal has been allowed, so planning permission has therefore been granted. An application for an award of costs was also made against the council, and this was also allowed. Unfortunately, because this has recently been received, we've not had a chance to actually consider the inspector's conclusions, but we will consider those decisions and report and also provide an update at the next meeting.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions about appeals? Chris?
Thanks for that. On the last one, the Marksbury Road one, so that's, you said planning permission's been granted on appeal?
Yes, that's correct.
And there's nothing we can do about that now?
Well, I think in the kind of first instance, we just need to consider the inspector's decisions and just kind of, sort of digest the findings there. And as I say, at the next meeting, we will, provide an update on those decisions.
Because obviously that's in my ward, and it's been turned down, I think, 4 times now. So I'm just intrigued on why it was over, the committee's ruling was over appealed, especially as there's got a covenant on that you can't build on it. So would the council be enacting that covenant?
I mean, if it would assist in advance of that meeting, we'd be happy to circulate those decisions to all committee members to review.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Good. Okay, fabulous. Enforcement, anything exciting in the enforcement world?
Well, there are 3 notices that have been served since the last meeting, and I just wanted to clarify in relation to the garages at Naseby Walk, there are actually 2 separate notices there. One being a notice under section 215 of the Town and Country Planning Act in relation to the untidy land, and the other notice being a planning enforcement notice relating to the removal of the unauthorised fencing at the site.
Thank you. Any questions about that? Nope. Fabulous. Okay, right, we're going to move on to the main event, which is the planning applications, and we'll start with the public forum for Stokes, Croft and Hepburn Road. I'll call people up by name if you've indicated that you're going to speak. If you could speak into the microphone, you have 1 minute. We operate a traffic light system, so it'll be green lights at the beginning of that minute. Then when you get to 30 seconds, it will go to amber, and if you could start wrapping up at that point, and then when it turns to red, if you could finish rapidly, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. The first person I'd like to call is Steve Mardale, please.
I speak in support of the proposed development as a local architect whose practice has been based in Stokes Croft, opposite Hepburn Road, for 18 years. I have no vested interest in the site or development. Stokes Croft is a distinctive and dynamic place whose character needs protecting. This doesn't, however, mean resisting progress and development. Having scrutinised the proposal, I'm perplexed as to why officers are recommending refusal. Proposed alterations to the Stokes Croft frontage are minimal, retaining its character, scale and subservience to the carriageworks building. Proposed new development to the rear is subservient in scale. The proposed increased footfall and active frontages to the rear and Hepburn Road will create natural surveillance as needed to address Hepburn Road's deep-rooted problems. I consider that the development represents a sensitive and conservative approach to a challenging urban site and is not solely commercially driven. I therefore request the application be approved.
Thank you very much. Tony Casey, please. No, okay. Robert Guy. I meant to say Tony. Are you Tony?
Good afternoon. I'm Tony, the applicant. We're a Bristol family-based business which started in St Andrews over 30 years ago. I really appreciate the support of our ward councillors Tim and Jude, Mike Davis, as well as our neighbours. 4 years ago, before we even had an architect, we met with Mike and the local police to get their advice, which we fully took on board. While we can't afford to do everything, we've incorporated as many benefits for the community as possible, including 2 workshops perfect for local creative businesses. I think it's vital not to lose the bigger picture here. Our development would help end crime that belights Hepburn Road, where in just 1 year there were over 1,000 crimes committed. Our scheme would make it much safer, more attractive and difficult for drug dealers to operate, and have people living and working here overlooking Hepburn Road and taking pride in this neglected corner of our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Robert Guy, please.
Good afternoon, I'm Robert Guy of Arturus Architects, who are the architects for the scheme. The site presented a number of significant challenges. It's a tight urban space, it's got serious crime problems adjacent, has a scrappy assortment of rear extensions, and of course it's in a conservation area. We've used these criteria to design a scheme which transforms Hepburn Road by placing homes and workshops facing directly onto it, but far enough away that they're not too affected. It protects the important Stokes Croft frontage by keeping new buildings out of sight. The only change to Stokes Croft elevation is an extra storey to the N3 properties, all sat below the original height of the carriageworks building, which itself was granted permission to have an additional storey and was indeed gutted. It avoids overdevelopment of the site while creating room for an extensive landscape with 11 new trees and a 93% biodiversity net gain. This means that Croftdale, which is of little architectural value and is already compromised by the adjoining development to the rear.
Thank you. Can you finish up now, please?
This is a well-considered scheme, and we recommend its acceptance.
Thank you very much. The Pegasus Group, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Henry Scanlon, the planning advisor for this application. Over the last 3 years, since the pre-app was submitted, we've done almost everything officers have asked for and the community, as the scheme evolved from a student-only development to a truly mixed-use scheme. We've had 4 sets of significant changes requested by officers. It's disappointing to now face a recommendation refusal on 3 issues which we totally disagree with. This scheme would enhance, not harm, the Stokes Croft Conservation Area. Historic England does not object. Bristol Civic Society agrees locally listed Croftdale should be demolished. The outstanding objections are minor, subjective, and don't warrant refusal. And we have now proven the scheme meets BREEAM Excellent. Officers have had the revised report 2 weeks ago and have not considered it. There's a planning balance here. I think the other speakers have summarised the significant benefits very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Drew Mock, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Drew. I own a shop on the site. I fully support this application. Our shop sits on the front of the site. I've been in Bristol for 10 years and in this location for about 4. Stokes Croft is an amazing place, but independent businesses are struggling. We need to encourage investment that brings new people and spending into the area. Having more than 80 people living here would be great news for local businesses. I'm not surprised people welcome the workshops on Hepburn Road nor Nine Market homes for rent, but I think it's a totally logical place for students and also for students to live. Students make a massive difference to our business, and young people are always the ones that add a bit of colour and fun to the place. So as a local business, I fully support this application, and for me, I can't wait for it to happen. I can't wait for this to happen soon enough. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much. You did very well. Okay, Bentley Burgess, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Bentley Burgess. As owners of several neighbouring properties, including the Love Inn at number 84, my family fully support this application. We've been in the heart of Bristol's cultural life for decades, particularly in and around Stokes Croft. In 1984, we opened the Tropic Club, the Bank, now Love Inn, in 1986, the Coat in 1992, and 130, now the Social, in 2001. We've been supporting and fighting to protect our city's nighttime economy for decades. But places do change, and development should be welcomed where it brings positive things to that community. The proposal absolutely does that. More homes, trees and workshops are all good for the area. If you've been to Hepburn Road and looked at the floor, you would have seen the floor littered with discarded drug paraphernalia. This is no way for local people to live, nor do I want this next to our properties, residential and commercial properties. It's not fair on the residents or on people enjoying a night out. I see no reason why the officers are refusing this application, and I think the benefits will undoubtedly outweigh any shortcomings.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Tim White, please.
Thank you. I'm here to support the application. I also speak for Councillors Cole and English, who I've shared this statement with. Firstly, of course, we'd all love to see this being social rent for houses, but that's not the case. I had initial reservations about student housing and yet more student housing. Having been to the site, I'm aware of how difficult it is to develop. I'm also aware that they've gone some way to address some of those concerns, and there's now general housing in the proposal as well as the workshops, which are going to be let out to local people. And I've been in the meetings where that's been discussed, and that's gone down very well. I am aware, of course, that there are concerns about the locally listed building. And again, it'd be great to keep all buildings, wouldn't it? But I'm not convinced any development could happen on this site with that intact. And I've checked with friends and colleagues of mine who work in the business, and they assure me that they're not just pulling the wool over my eyes on this one. It's a difficult site to develop. So I also think that to judge whether Croftdale should stay or go, needs to take into account the fact that 4-storey building's already been given permission there, so any heritage implications have already been damaged. I mean, I moved to this area 20 years ago, and the site has always been in need of...
I'm really sorry, Tim, you're well and truly over the limit.
Crime, drugs, that kind of thing, all need to be addressed in the area. Sorry.
That's right, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move to the officer presentation now. Members of the committee have the officer's presentation on their laptops, and we did undertake a site visit earlier today in the snow, and we had the frostbite to prove it. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think every member here actually went to site, so I'll try and briefly cover the overall context. The application concerns land and buildings located in the Stokes Croft conservation area. It concerns a terraced row of buildings fronting Stokes Croft with the notable exclusion of number 94, shown here because it's not in the applicant's ownership. The site also includes land and buildings to the rear, accessed via Hepburn Road, including Croftdale, this building here, which is locally listed. The buildings are currently in a mix of use with some commercial, also some HMO student accommodation across various levels. And the yard to the rear of the site was recently used for a business making, a windscreen repair business, but that business has now relocated. So an aerial photo of the site, you can see the carriage works development to the north, which is now substantially complete. This is the locally listed building, Croftdale, and the Stokes Croft frontage up here. There was a fall in levels across the site, which members would have noticed from the site visit, with the Stokes Croft end being at a higher level than the rear of the site. And this is another view from the opposite angle, again showing the carriage works development, and there are residential properties along Hepburn Road to the rear here, and also on the opposite side of the road. The main access to the site is via Hepburn Road, but there's also a gated access, which again was pointed out to members on site via number 92 Stokes Croft. And again, some existing photos of the site. And this is the frontage along Stokes Croft. So in terms of public consultation, there have been 3 rounds of consultation to account for amendments made to the scheme and further information submitted by the applicant. These have generated relatively little interest, as shown on the screen. So this is the proposed landscape plan, which is probably the most useful plan in terms of demonstrating the overall layout. So planning permission is sought for the demolition of Croftdale and all of the buildings to the rear of the site, and construction of 3 new blocks. So it'll be Block A, Block B, and Block C, and these will account for 9 residential units, 2 new workshop units, and 59 bedrooms of student accommodation. So I'll briefly go through the proposed floor plans. Given the level change across the site, development is only proposed at this lower ground floor level at the rear. In Block A here, there's student accommodation. In Block C, there's communal cycle storage and some Use Class C3 flats. And the 2 workshops here, fronting Hepburn Road, are located in Block C. This is the proposed ground floor plan. Again, student accommodation in Block A. Block B is Use Class C3 flats, and above the workshops there is additional student accommodation. And yeah, from this plan you can see that the access route through the site to Stokes Croft via the gated entrance, and the communal bin storage area is along this route. So this is the proposed first floor plan, similar to the ground floor student accommodation, C3 flats and further student accommodation fronting Hepburn Road. The development also includes the introduction of a new HMO student flat above numbers 100 and 102 Stokes Croft. This is the second floor, again student accommodation above numbers 100 and 102, and the final floor of student accommodation in Block A. And finally, this is the proposed third floor plan, which shows the additional storey extension above numbers 9800 and 102 Stokes Croft to introduce further HMO student accommodation. So this is a proposed CDI visual. This is slightly out of date. Amendments have been made to the rooftop extension here, since this was submitted, how it is quite useful in terms of providing an overview of the scale and design and general massing of the proposals to the rear of the site. So this is the Block A, Block B and Block C, and this is Hepburn Road along here. Overall, yeah, a mixture of 3 and 4 story blocks. And this is the proposed existing elevations fronting Stokes Croft at the top, and this is the proposed elevation showing the upward extension to add an additional story to numbers 98 to 102. So the Planning Authority has been working with the applicant for some time now on this proposal, and a number of sensitive and important issues have been identified with this site, which has transpired during the assessment, and that's necessitated several rounds of amended plans and further information alongside public reconsultation, which was highlighted earlier. However, it did get to the stage when the applicant confirmed that they didn't want to make any further amendments to the scheme, and therefore officers have progressed towards a recommendation, and that is unfortunately a recommendation for refusal for a number of reasons which I'll cover. They are set out in detail within the report. However, for clarity, I'll just go through them in the slides. So the primary concern is probably the demolition of Croftdale, which is a locally listed building. Both the council's conservation team and city design group object to the loss of this building. It's located in the Stokes Croft conservation area, where it's identified within the character appraisal as being a building of merit. It's furthermore locally listed, so has further significance and protection as a non-designated heritage asset in planning terms. Overall, it's a well-designed building of historic and architectural interest to the city. One of the last few surviving buildings of this type in the area, and that was confirmed by the council's conservation team as part of consultation through the application. It's accepted the building isn't in an overly prominent or visible position within the conservation area. This is primarily due to the poor quality, general neglected state of the application sites surrounding the building. However, this doesn't reduce the quality of the building or its status and designation as a heritage asset. That is still a material consideration. And overall, it's the view of officers that the redevelopment of this site could better reveal this building and enhance this part of the conservation area, which would be in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework, specifically paragraph 206. The building's in a good condition. It's currently inhabited, safe, and is showing no signs of decay or anything to indicate that the complete demolition is necessary. So the complete demolition of a locally listed building of this, one that's clearly identified as being of merit to the conservation area, is an in-principle issue for the Planning Authority. It will undoubtedly cause harm to the special historic character and significance of the conservation area through the demolition and loss of an important locally listed building which has been identified of merit. The council's conservation team have identified that the loss of this building would amount to substantial harm to the conservation area. The National Planning Policy Framework at paragraph 200 states that any harm to designated heritage assets, such as the conservation area in this instance, should require clear and convincing justification. It's not considered that that has been provided as part of this application. From the layout plan, you can see the building is located in the corner of the site, and as such isn't located in a particularly prominent or awkward position within the site, which would make the redevelopment difficult or impossible. It's the view of officers that the building could easily be retained and the site developed in a more proportionate manner to increase the density, but also overall enhance the character of the conservation area through retention and better revealing of this locally listed building. No evidence has been put forward that the redevelopment of the site is entirely dependent on the total demolition of the locally listed building. And as such, it cannot be said that the nature of the heritage asset prevents all reasonable use of the site, and clear and convincing justification hasn't been provided for that loss. So the application is considered to conflict with the National Plan and Policy Framework in this respect. Another concern which has been raised primarily by Historic England following consultation is the impact of the upward extension on the Stokes Croft frontage. So this Historic England normally comment on planning applications where they involve grade 2 star or grade 1 listed buildings, and the Carriage Works building adjacent to the site is grade 2 star listed, hence they have commented specifically on this element of the scheme. And it was their view that the upward extension of these buildings and the replication and introduction of poor quality fenestration and detailing matching the lower levels would cause harm to the significance of this grade 2 star listed building. Along Hepburn Road, there are both design and living environment concerns in relation to the scale, siting and design of Block C and its relationship with the street. You can see from the existing and proposed elevation fronting Hepburn Road that the development will considerably increase the scale and massing of development fronting the road. The Council's urban design team raised specific concern that this would have a harmful overbearing impact on Hepburn Road, which is already very narrow and would result in an even more oppressive and enclosed environment for pedestrians and other users. And similarly, the student accommodation in this block will also face neighbouring residential blocks on the opposite side of Hepburn Road in very close proximity. It's considered that that would have result in a poor quality and oppressive living environment for future occupants, given the close proximity between the windows in this elevation and neighbouring development. And this is particularly evident as some units within this block fail to meet all BRE amenity criteria that's used to assess daylight and sunlight for new residential units. It was requested during the course of the application that this block was brought away from Hepburn Road to increase that separation distance and improve the overall living environment for occupants and create a less oppressive and enclosed environment for Hepburn Road. And whilst the upper floor has been pulled back as shown, the lower floors remain built up to the pavement, and the final bay here is still full height up against the pavement, so it's not considered that that has adequately addressed the concerns regarding the overall overbearing and enclosed relationship this block would have with Hepburn Road. There are also concerns regarding the detailed design of the development, particularly the elevational treatment of the blocks. Block A here, for example, the Council's urban design team, following consultation, specifically commented that the design appears generic and lacks interest, with the large facades lacking adequate subdivision or relief. The Council's urban living supplementary planning document also specifically says that entrances to large blocks should be celebrated within the design to improve legibility and add interest. The entrance to the block shown here, it's not considered that that would add interest to the design and is not of a sufficient quality for the historic setting. The Council's urban living supplementary document also states specifically that major development should create connections that are attractive, well lit, well overlooked and safe. So there'll be two main access routes into the site for residents. One of them will be via Hepburn Road, which, as already mentioned, it's the view of officers that the environment here will be even more enclosed and overbearing. The second route will be via the existing passageway, which was highlighted on site, also shown again in the image on the bottom right. This will be a gated access underneath number 92 Stokes Croft. And again, significant concerns are raised regarding the quality of this pedestrian route, which will be heavily used by future occupants. The route will be essentially a narrow and enclosed passageway lined with the bin enclosure, with no active frontages. It's not considered that that addresses the Council's urban living SPD, in that the connection will not be attractive, well lit or well overlooked. Number 90 Stokes Croft, which is this building here, contains a 7-bed student cluster flat on the ground, first, second and third floors. The flat includes a number of rear windows, as shown here. There's one at first floor level, one at ground floor, which is slightly obscured by the boundary wall. They're located in this elevation here, if you can see the cursor, hopefully. Given the close proximity between these windows and the new habitable room windows in Block B, this distance is approximately 7 metres between facing windows. It's not considered that that would ensure adequate privacy for existing residents in number 90, but also future occupants in Block C. There are some quite close relationships between other windows within blocks, and on balance they have been accepted given the tight inner city environment. However, the distance of 7 metres, as is the case here, is just too great for officers to support. It's considered that would have a harmful impact with regards to amenity and privacy. Another concern is in relation to the separation distance between habitable room windows within the student accommodation at first floor level in numbers 100 and 102 Stokes Croft and Block A. So essentially it's the accommodation at this level here. Block A here will considerably increase the scale and massing of development in close proximity to these windows. It's considered that that scale in close proximity would have a harmful overbearing impact on this window, to the detriment of the amenity of future occupants. Generally, when assessing this sort of relationship, a 25-degree unobstructed angle is sought from the centre of windows, and that this is sort of guidance highlighted by the BRE. If development obstructs or impedes on that angle, it's generally considered that is an unacceptable relationship, and that is the case in this instance. A further concern is the impact of the development on the rear of numbers 23 to 25 Hepburn Road. So that's these properties here which were highlighted on site. They include rear amenity space and habitable room windows in their rear elevations, which face the eastern boundary of the application site. Croftdale, the localist building, is sited in relatively close proximity to these properties. That's about 12 metres separation distance at the closest point. However, the building is only 2 stories in height and is sited away from that boundary, meaning it's not considered that the current relationship is harmful in terms of amenity. The proposed development will demolish this building and considerably increase the scale and massing of development at the site. You can see here the building will be sited right up against the boundary, whereas Croftdale's set back. And from here you can see as well that the development will also considerably increase the scale and height of the development, increasing from a 2-storey property to a 4-storey development up against this boundary here. It's considered that that would have harmful impact on the rear elevation of these properties in terms of overbearing and overshadowing. And one final point just to highlight on this regard is that the carriageworks development closest to the rear boundary of these properties has been restricted to 2 stories, where it's close to these rear amenity spaces and windows to protect the amenity of these properties. Obviously, this development will, however, be full height up until the boundary in closer proximity than the carriageworks is. So another refusal reason is related to BREEAM. So policy BCS 15 in the core strategy requires that a BREEAM excellent rating will be expected for this type of development. The BREEAM scoring methodology and ranking can be seen in the top left. So this is the excellent rating that is expected for this type of development. The methodology and scoring is quite technical. However, it basically takes into account various elements of a development or building and provides a score on how sustainable the building is. So a BREEAM pre-assessment was submitted to support this application, which shows that the development will achieve a BREEAM rating of very good, which fails to satisfy BCS 15, which requires an excellent rating. So overall, officers are generally supportive of the mixed-use redevelopment of this site. It's recognised the site needs to be redeveloped, and there's certainly potential for that, and there's no objections to redevelopment or the introduction of the proposed uses in principle. However, the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, requires great weight to be given to conservation and identifies that where proposed development would lead to substantial harm to a designated heritage asset, such as the Stokes Croft Conservation Area, then local plan authorities should refuse consent unless it can be demonstrated that there are substantial public benefits to outweigh that substantial harm. It's not considered that the development will deliver substantial public benefits. There will be some public benefits, and these are acknowledged and recognised within the report. However, it's the view of officers that they can be easily achieved and delivered on this site, whilst also addressing the important issues that have been identified and highlighted, and also retaining the locally listed building within the conservation area. So the scheme is recommended for refusal. There are three refusal reasons set out in the report. The first one mainly covers heritage, the loss of Croftdale, and the impact of the development on the setting of the Grade 2 star listed carriage works. The second is more related to the detailed design and the amenity impacts on neighbours and also living environment for future occupants. And the final one is in relation to the development failing to meet the BREEAM excellent rating without adequate justification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Chris has a question and Richard has a question. All right, I'm going to take yours first.
And number 3,
She says not doing it.
Refusal about BREEAM excellent. One of the statements said you were told 2 weeks ago that it was BREEAM excellent now. So why is the difference between what's said by the public and us?
So the assessment, the recommendation is made under the information that was submitted during the course of the application, which demonstrated a BREEAM very good rating. Since the recommendation was made and the committee report finalised, the applicant did submit further information, but it wasn't submitted with sufficient time for officers to consider in advance of the committee.
So you couldn't put that on the amendment sheet then?
It wasn't considered in time, so there was no need for it to be on the amendment sheet.
Right. And secondly, if we granted this, what would the comeback be on the council or us as a committee for knocking down the building, the listed building, which we looked at it today, and I wouldn't known which building it would have been that was locally with some historic interest or whatever it was. So what would the comeback be on the council if we actually agreed this?
I'm not sure what you mean by comeback. If you agree that the demolition of the building is acceptable, then the applicant could demolish the building and construct the development. The application would grant approval for that, so there'll be no other issues to look at ultimately. I think just one thing worth highlighting is that whilst members may take a different view of the quality and merits of the building, it is ultimately a heritage asset and needs to be assessed in accordance with planning policy. This is a material consideration. There's national policy and local policy that needs to be considered in terms of the building.
Yeah, I understand that, but there's, I mean, I'll put it in my old school days, we ain't going to get in trouble for making that decision if to agree to this application.
No, I'm not sure who...
That's all I...
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just to supplement that, I mean, it would really remain the case that, every application would be considered on its merits. But I think in terms of kind of you know, what's required here and what Tom covered in his presentation is around the kind of clear and convincing justification that would be required in relation to the loss of the heritage asset. So really members would need to be satisfied that that was met.
Thank you. Richard, then Guy.
I've got 3 questions or 3 points. The first one relates to Chris's about the BREEAM Excellent rating, which the applicant claims and the officer denies. My understanding is information supplies does support it, and that the applicants waited almost 3 years since the pre-app for this. It was prepared to wait a couple more just for us to look at that. So I frankly find it rather reprehensible we're not actually addressing this. That's a point. My second point, but does follow on from Chris's about Croftdale House. Now, I appreciate beauty and value is in the eye of the beholder, but in my view, having seen it as well, it does constitute a very inconsiderable asset, and it doesn't make a notable value or even a non-notable value to the conservation area. Bearing in mind we don't have an objection from Historic England and the Civic Society, who naturally champions historic buildings in Bristol, supports it. It does seem strange that the view of officers is to oppose it.
Okay. With regards to the preamble, I'm not quite sure what the question was.
It wasn't really. It was a
I was going to say,
to be fair.
Richard, you are sort of skipping ahead. We are still at the questions, but did you have a question?
The second one was about the status of the value of the conservation issue.
Yeah, no, so I can answer that one, certainly. So in terms of Historic England not objecting to the loss, Historic England would only comment on proposals involving grade 2 star or grade 1 listed buildings. So they wouldn't have commented or got involved with any proposals involving this building. They normally, as is the case in this instance, delegate that to the council's conservation team, and they're the ones who we would go to for advice on proposals affecting grade 2 listed buildings or locally listed buildings. And the council's conservation team are the ones who identified that this building should be retained. Also the council's urban design team, and also the conservation advisory panel following consultation, they again also objected to the loss of this building. So it's clear that the building does hold merit, and whilst certain groups or certain people may not see that, as already mentioned, it does form a non-designated heritage asset, which is a material consideration. It's also identified as being of merit in the character appraisal. It's also in the Stokes Croft conservation area. So there's clear heritage value to the building, and officers don't think it's unreasonable to try and retain the building given the context.
My final question is, for most of my time on council, 30 years almost, I've served on DC committees and probably been almost to as many visiting committees as I had hot dinners. In that time, I don't think a single one's not been with the applicant or the agent present to answer concerns, as we didn't have today, though I dare say officers can cite examples. Why was the decision taken not to involve the applicant or its agents?
So in terms of the site visit, really the purpose of that was really for members to see the site and just for features to be pointed out that would assist in the consideration of the application this afternoon.
But that's what we always do. So what's the difference with any other application?
I'd like to say, I mean, I also have been on DC and chaired DC for quite some time. Normally site visits are to view the site and see the situation there, not to be lobbied or briefed by...
Not to be lobbied, but we can pose questions and make points to the applicant and their agents who will actually should know rather more.
But we don't normally have the applicant at the site visit.
I won't.
Guy, I assume you have questions.
Thanks, Chair. I'm right in thinking, aren't I, that the heritage asset issue is not an absolute. There are cases where we will look at the heritage asset in the context of the good that would be done by the application, and you weigh the one against the other. Is that right?
Yeah, so national planning policy, essentially there's two stages, really. There's one that there needs to be adequate, clear and convincing justification for the loss or the harm to the heritage asset. So that would need to be satisfied in the first instance, and then there's a second stage which that if the harm is justified, you need to look at the public benefit, and that can obviously be various issues that need to be weighed in the balance.
So some of the apologies, Councillor Hunter. So some of the benefits that were kind of flagged during the officer's report were the potential for example, for social housing. Now this is a development that looks as though it could tolerate a 10th residence in there that would open it up to a social housing obligation, but that wasn't part of this application. Is that right? Because this is obviously an area where we desperately need social housing.
Yeah, there's no affordable housing proposed as part of this proposal. It doesn't meet the threshold for that. I
was going to say, because the report reads as though there is room for one. I'm just thinking of the paragraph on page 84, that it would have been possible to create more density and that would have enabled some, or would have, I suppose, unlocked the obligation to include social housing. Is that right? So
9 flats were proposed. The affordable housing threshold kicks in at 10. So if there was one more flat, then affordable housing could have been considered. And the other significant potential benefit, I suppose, again, as mentioned in the report, was the opportunity to create or to retain and enhance the commercial frontages onto Stokes Croft. That opportunity has also not been taken in this proposal. And what I'm wondering is, I'm assuming the reason none of those things are in the proposal is because of viability. Is that right? In other words, the scheme wouldn't make enough money if there were commercial frontages, social housing, or they didn't demolish the historic asset. Is that right? I'm just wondering if we have that viability assessment. No, we don't have any viability information regarding why those elements weren't included. Okay. We wouldn't have asked for that as part of this application, that level of detail. The applicant could have provided that, but no, we don't have that. So just kind of final question, I promise, but it sounded like it would be possible for the applicant to submit a viability statement saying we couldn't do any of this. Is that right? If the applicant wishes to provide detailed viability information to demonstrate that this is the only form of development appropriate for this site, then they could submit whatever evidence they feel would help justify that. But again, in terms of the policy assessment, it's not something that we would necessarily ask for. Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Andrew?
Thanks. I've got 2 questions, one on a section of the report and then more a process question. The first question is with regards to a paragraph on page 41 of the report under the comments from the Housing Delivery Strategy and Enabling Manager. And there's a section that starts with, it is noted that C3 units are referred to in the schedule as rented units. Therefore, consideration should be given as to whether the scheme would compromise a build-to-rent product as defined in the PPG build-to-rent. I think there's supposed to be a link in there somewhere. Can you comment more on that? Because the suggestion is that if it were to be treated as build-to-rent, then that would unlock a requirement for 20% affordable places.
Yeah, I think those comments were in relation to if the scheme could be improved to include 10 residential units, so the affordable housing threshold would be kicked in. And given that it's only 9 units, then there would be no requirement. So essentially those comments couldn't be applied.
Right, so, right, okay. Right. And then the process question. Normally, obviously, when we get an application that's recommended for approval, we have a list of all the conditions that the officers propose would be applied, and they cover all sorts of things, as you know. Obviously, this has come to us recommended for refusal, and therefore we don't have a list of all the conditions that would be applied. So if we vote to approve this, do we leave the conditioning entirely in the hands of the officers? A sort of supplementary to that is, I would anticipate that if we were minded to approve, there might be things that we would want to make sure were conditioned based on some of the comments in the reports and what we've seen today. So A, could we specify those, and B, could we be confident that a comprehensive condition list would then be drawn up?
So conditions can be delegated to officers, and we could work out those with the applicant. If there's any specific issues that you feel should be addressed via condition, again, we can consider those and make sure that they're secured. Yeah.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions, which is around sort of routes through the site. So the route down that alleyway, is that going to be closed to the public and just open to the residents?
Yeah, I think that the understanding is that it will initially be gated, so only residents can use it. Maybe in the future, if issues in the area improve, or there's some sort of study showing that it can be opened up to all users, then it may be. But for now, the development just proposes that to be gated for residents.
So it's basically a gated development because there's a gate at the back as well?
Yes, yeah.
I sat on the committee that gave permission to the carriage works. I seem to remember there was a lot of conversation about making sure that that wasn't a gated community. So wondering how this application would be reconciled with other developments like carriage works, this one being gated and the carriage works not being gated, for example.
I'm not sure about the assessment that went on with the carriage works. I think obviously the issue of this site was considered about the gated access, but it wasn't considered that the scale of the site and the route through the site was necessary to be opened up at this stage, given the security issues and given that there was another route to the rear via Hepburn Road. So it wasn't considered such an important route to remain open. Obviously it would be beneficial if it wasn't gated, but at this stage it wasn't considered a reason for refusal.
Okay, thank you. And then also on the site visit, that we had some conversation around increasing the adopted highway of Hepburn Road. I think you said you sort of pointed that out during the committee. Which bit is being adopted?
Yeah, so it'll be to the rear of the site. It's the sections around here where the new loading bay is going to be and the servicing. A lot of work went into this with the applicant and the council's highways team regarding securing an appropriate and acceptable arrangement regarding servicing and deliveries. So it's this section here. There'll be no changes to Hepburn Road itself.
Okay, thank you. So there's probably a question more for highways around sort of safety of access on Hepburn Road itself, where there's workshop entrances that are straight onto the road, which is two ways at the moment. So what are your concerns around that? And then I've also got sort of, probably not questions that you can necessarily answer, but questions around how a lot of the applicants' arguments around making the site safer, and I'm wondering how, in this setup, how does Hepburn Road become more visible and more safe?
The normal way we would do this with the technical approval stage of the Section 278, because we normally get a road safety audit done at each technical approval stage to make sure that would be, because as explained, the site isn't overly dense. If it wasn't for all the other issues, we would not be overly concerned with that. I mean, if it did come back with a redesign, the obvious thing for us would be the Hepburn Road ground floor to be set back with an slight undercroft, the mezzanine level of the things, so that we've got a wider footway for comfortable movement. But within the context of what we assessed, the transport concerns were minimal, I think, with it, so they would only complement what my colleagues are identifying as objections. We would always, as you know, want more sustainable transport benefits, but we have to go proportionately with what's going to come on in the area.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Fabian, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I've got a few questions. First, I want to come back to is the BREEAM Excellent, because I thought the whole point of the amendment sheet is it's for last minute stuff that's come in since the main report was written. And it's like we get the public forum statements literally the day before. Sometimes they don't even rock up till the morning of the planning committee meeting. You have to try and quickly read them but so I'm a little puzzled as to why, if the site now meets BREEAM Excellent, the amendment sheet doesn't cover that and simply say, okay, delete reason for refusal 3 because we've now got this evidence. So I'm just puzzled as to why that seems to have been ignored.
We don't know that the site does meet BREEAM Excellent. The applicant has submitted information they believe it does now, but we would require consultation with the Council Sustainable Cities team to look into that in detail and confirm that they're happy with everything. We haven't had time to conduct that consultation in advance of the committee, so it wouldn't have been possible to present to members that the site meets BREEAM Excellent.
But should we be mindful to not go with the officer recommendation? Could we condition BREEAM Excellence?
It wouldn't really be our preferred approach. It's something that we prefer to deal with up front, but if members felt that kind of would be sort of something that they would like to see conditioned, then it would be open, sort of for that to happen.
Okay, one more question, just about the workshops. Looking at that map, or that plan there, none of them, so the entrance is where the road is slightly wider, so you go through the gates and then you've got the entrance to the workshops. So there isn't actually any access straight onto the narrow bit of Hepburn Road. Okay. The other thing, there was, in the report it said about overlooking from the residential flats above the workshops, but when I went down Hepburn Road, because I walked down there this morning when I came down to the site visit, most of the other side just seemed to be blank wall, apart from the bit just as the road widens where the buildings are really set back and there's this metal paling fence. So I'm a little puzzled as to what they're overlooking apart from a blank wall.
Yeah.
Most of that side on the left is blank wall.
Yeah, so the concern in relation to Hepburn Road isn't overlooking. It's concerns regarding the outlook for residents in the new flats and the close proximity to development on the other side of Hepburn Road. It's considered that the close proximity would have an overbearing impact on those windows to the detriment of the amenity of occupants.
Are you basically saying it would be a bit dark inside?
Essentially, yeah.
Katja, if you haven't got a follow-up, Fabian. Oh, into the mic, please. Mike.
Sorry, some of the issues about overcrowding and the darkness is some of my concern, but there is one thing, as I stands 86 to 92 and then 96 to 102 Stokes Croft Road are parts of the property owner's remit. They belong to him, they're not separate. And it seems funny that why aren't they developing the backs of those things? Because one of the issues you pointed out was one of the flats that overlooks, that we can see there, had some windows that overlook the actual yard. But they seem to be staying there. They don't seem to be changing that. That cannot be heritage. Because that looks all like very modern, higgledy-piggledy, cheap as you possibly can developments on the back of that. And why aren't they changing the backs of those buildings to fit in better with the design? Just wondered.
I think that would be a question more for the developer than the planning authority. Ultimately, the entire site is located in a conservation area.
So you can't change those must have been done in the last 40, 50 years, and they're not heritage.
I think
really cheap windows for a start.
It would be ideally for officers. We would seek to improve every element of the site we could do, but it would probably be unreasonable to ask for a complete redevelopment of the site where there are certain elements which aren't considered to be existing.
You're knocking down the building that's Croftdale, which we're granted we can't see the inside, so we don't really know the full history of that building. But you're leaving up this little higgledy-piggledy mess that's really not old. I mean, if it was a cutesy old higgledy-piggledy, I'd go for it. And also, they're not doing the frontage of the shops either, which is also not. I know those buildings are old, but there's a lot of new stuff put on there, and not in a very good way either, in a very substantial way, that reflects the oldness of the buildings.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean.
Again, I think these are probably questions for the applicant more so than the planning authority.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you basically going with the answer being that they could sort of change the backs of those shops, or
I think
could they not?
there's certainly more improvements that could be made to the site than are being proposed under the application, but we can only consider the changes being made, not what changes we would like to see made.
Okay, thank you. And what's the setup inside of the sort of the shop fronts now? Could they be returned to shop frontages in the future, or are they lost to accommodation forever?
So they are currently. You can see some of them here. This one, for example, is currently in use as HMO housing, and it is established as that. So there is no way that we could force it to become a commercial unit again. But we did seek during the course of the application to reintroduce commercial units with shop fronts to these units, and this was something that Historic England also raised as a concern. They said that it would represent the clearest heritage benefit to the area to reintroduce commercial frontages and shop fronts to these units, and we did ask the applicant to look into that, but unfortunately that plans depicting this weren't forthcoming.
Okay, fabulous, thank you. Guy, did you wave at me your hand? No. Okay, any more questions? Okay, right, we'll move to the debate. I think it's quite clear that we know that something needs to change on this site, but the question is whether or not this is the right development for it. I saw Guy's hand first, and then Richard's, and then Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, having done this, I'm really glad we did the site visit in advance. And listening to the public forum and the developer and the representatives of the local community, something needs to happen on this site. As you say, it's really, really evident. You only need to walk up to it to see that there's hugely more potential than is being fulfilled with what's there at the moment. So I really want to see something happen, and I really like most of this scheme, and I agree with pretty much everything that was said at the start of the meeting. It does strike me that what we've got here is a development where there is a trade-off. There's a quantum to be established between the policy implications of losing that historic building and the benefits to the local community. And we have a number of areas where that benefit could be fulfilled. We have the opportunity to make the building BREEAM excellent, which it sounds like either has been fulfilled or could be fulfilled, at least as far as the developer is concerned. We have the opportunity for the commercial frontage on Stokes Croft, which the heritage team have said could represent a significant benefit. We have the opportunity for social housing there as well. And it strikes me that where we're at is a point where the developer, bluntly, either needs to preserve the historic building or to deliver more of those benefits, or needs to demonstrate that the development is not viable in either of those things. I think if any of those tests were met, I would feel comfortable voting to approve. As it is, I know that we're going to move the officer's recommendation to refuse, because, as is tradition, I would struggle to vote against that officer's recommendation unless one of those things changes. So, as we move into the debate, I would propose to the other members of the committee, what we need is some way of sort of untying that knot. And I would say buying ourselves some time for the developer to either come forward with additional social benefits, a means of preserving the historic asset, or providing that viability information that simply says you're not going to get these improvements unless both of those things happen. Buying us that extra time to work with officers to deliver one of those things might be the best way to go, and that actually a deferral might be a way of achieving the best compromise for both the community and preserving the historic asset. But I'll happily listen to the debate, and if I'm swayed, who knows? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Richard, then Chris, then Fabian.
I'm sure all of us feel privileged to serve on DC committees. We're also fortunate to have informed and but talented advice from our officers, which I know we all depend on. But I have to say, as a lay councillor, lay member of this committee, I always value the views of the ward members. We've heard cross-party, the two Liberals, the current Labour member who represents it, former councillor Mike Davis, who used to represent the area for Labour. We've also heard local residents' favour and the civic society, who must be the bastion of defending Bristol's historic heritage. In this context, I read the report over the last few days with the sense I was living in almost a parallel universe. It did seem that we were throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Here we are, we have, in my view, an imaginative, positive regeneration scheme on semi-derelict brownfield land in the city centre. We won't have to actually build more houses in greenfield areas as a consequence. They're also offering several workshops, employment space. Surely this is what Ashley needs desperately, I guess. And also it's seeking not only to regenerate the area or add to it, but actually to improve significantly the social context and reduce crime, crack alley. And that's what is being done by locals and the media, is something which we as a planning committee should be helping them to address. Here we have a scheme, it seems to me, which is well designed, it is moderate. Yes, I agree, it doesn't try to cram in the maximum number of units, and consequently it doesn't hit the threshold for affordable housing. But equally so, local people often say they're in danger of destroying the scheme by putting in too many rabbit hatches. So it seems to me this is a scheme well worth looking at. I like the design, the scheme, the mixed character. I like things like not only the crime reduction potential, the overlooking, the increased footage and usage of a Hepburn Road and the safe way to the front to 6 Croft, but they proposed art, public art in Hepburn Road. That's great, all to which will actually improve that locality. And I must say, I'm not convinced at all by the arguments about the local heritage building. That isn't listed in the strict terms. There isn't actually planning protection for these buildings. It seems to me, on balance, it's a building which doesn't really contribute to the character of the conservation area and could be actually demolished as part of this scheme. In fact, if we are minded to approve it, I'm happy to volunteer to drive the demolition vehicle in there. Finally, could I say, I'm disappointed by the officers regarding both the BREEAM excellent rating. Even a deferral of a couple of weeks could have had this information. The applicants waited up to 3 years, which is a long time, and we're delaying further regeneration of that area. But these, frankly, design quibbles, which are in there, in the report, frankly, on the great scheme of things, on balance, I believe this is a scheme we should support. It does seem as if the officers are throwing the kitchen sink against this, and the design quibbles are a part of that. So I'll be voting against the officer recommendation. I hope a majority of members are similarly convinced. If so, I hope we can move an approval, but that depends on the debate we're about to have.
Thank you very much, Richard. I was hoping we'd get past the session without calling it Crack Alley. Chris and Fabian, and then Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Guy and Richard have said. And me personally, I would have liked to have seen the 10th one, but the diversity of those houses, you've got the apartments, you've got 3 and 4 bed, which in the inner city is amazing to get that. So I can let that one go. The support in the local area, you've got shopkeepers, you've got people who live there, people who work there. They're all in favour of it. The 3 local councillors and previous one, Mike, they're all in favour of it. And when I went there today, I'm like Guy, I'm really glad we had that before today's meeting, and I think we might need to do a bit more on these sort of controversial areas. But I'm with Richard. The positives for this site by far outweigh, in my view, the negatives, and I won't be voting for the officers' recommendations, which I do with heavy heart. I know how hard they work, but there are a few things I would have liked to have seen changed. But looking at everything that has gone through today, the outlook of it, the ecology impact, which is better for the area, to try to security by design in that area, all of that stuff, it's much more positive. I don't like to see any building which has got a bit of heritage to it removed, but this application by far positives outweigh the negatives, so I won't be voting for the officer's recommendation, and I would most probably go along with Richard. I'd like to go for approval as long as the BREEAM Excellent is agreed.
Yeah, I have to agree with everything that's been said so far. I mean, it's not perfect. I would like Guy. I'd like to have seen the shop fronts reinstated, and I'm sure that could easily be done. And if they wanted to sort of do that as a sort of a goodwill gesture, if we were minded to approve it, that'd be really cool. I think the need to reduce crime in an area that is clearly got major issues, so much so that it ended up on a national TV programme featuring the local MP of Hangham Debonair. We need to make that street safer. I think there's probably other things that we need to be looking at, like making it one way, because otherwise I just think I think it's too narrow for traffic. But I think the fact that this development will create overlooking on a site that has been a crime hotspot will make it a lot safer for everybody in the area. I think part of our role as a councillor is to actually try and pull the cork out of the bottle, let the genie out the lamp. And when a community actually say, when the local people are going to be living with this, actually say, we want this to happen, we're duty bound to listen unless there's compelling reasons not to. So, yeah, I mean, if they could have come up with something without losing the heritage asset, although I'm slightly puzzled as to why that's a heritage asset when far more interesting buildings have been lost in the past. I mean, before the Carriage Works redevelopment happened, there was a really nice 50s street lamp on the edge of the derelict site, and it would have been great if that had been preserved, even if it had been relocated, because it was really quite iconic. But anyway, that was lost and just went in and skipped, so okay. But, I think there's a couple of things where the officer explained about how Block A is a bit, the side wall of Block A is a bit close to the back windows of the student flats in the Stokes Croft properties at the back. I'm sure, in the past you could do things like either put white tiles on that wall or ensure that it's painted, given a bright treatment to ensure light goes through. There are ways, I'm sure we could condition something to ensure that it isn't just a brick wall glaring at those back windows. And I think, you know, tiles or bright render would solve that and make it acceptable. For me, I think the good in the scheme more than outweighs the bad. Yes, I'd like to see the shop fronts restored. That would be cool. You know, but you know, it will, you know, provide more student accommodation on the brownfield site rather than somewhere else. It's, you know, it's got local support. The good outweighs the bad. It's not perfect, but the good outweighs the bad, and I can't support the officer recommendation, and if it's put to the table, I will vote to approve.
Thank you, Fabian. Okay, Andrew, and then Katya, do you want to?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've gone one way and then I've gone the other, and then I've gone back the way again. And I found the site visit earlier helpful as well. I think, following on from what Fabian said, I think the lack of opposition, we all know as ward councillors that when a scheme is unpopular, you know, and as planning committee members, when a scheme is unpopular, we see it up there, and we've not had that. So I think that's significant. I think the support of the ward members themselves is significant. Looking at the looking at the scheme, I think it could be better. There are lots of things I would love to see. You know, I'd love to see greater permeability of the site. Even, and I admit that. You know, I accept that there may be issues and, you know, security concerns in the short term. But, you know, I'd like to have seen the site a little bit more permeable. Even so, I'd like to have seen greater commitment on things like the material and the windows on the Stokes Croft facing side, the things that have been highlighted with regards to the shop fronts and the way that looks and is presented. But I think looking at the reasons for objection, I'm not convinced by the of the value of the locally listed asset, having seen it in situ, having thought about it, having, you know, considered it quite some time. I think perhaps the applicants could have made a better job of justifying why they feel it, you know, it's reasonable to demolish it. But I'm not convinced of the value of keeping it either, given the current situ of that. The Brian points have been well made by other councillors, and that leaves just one reason for refusal. And I think on balance, I don't feel that the scale of the scheme, the way it's laid out, those concerns over overshadowing and whatnot are sufficient in themselves to justify refusing the scheme. So I think I found myself at a point where I'll be voting to reject the officer's recommendation. I've got a couple of ideas about potential conditions that we might want to request.
Thank you. Katya?
I think I feel about the same way as Andrew. I'm very conflicted about this particular development. Obviously, that needs a development over there desperately. I'm not sure about Croftdale, whether that is heritage or not. Don't know. But I'm very disappointed that the buildings that are there already, the ones facing Stokes Croft, and also the multitude of extensions at the back of it, haven't been dealt with, and that could have stopped some of the sightline problems that you have with windows looking onto each other and stuff like that. I'm a bit concerned about that. But again, having said with the local community is very in favour of this, they would like it, the local councillors are supporting it. That's, again, the other side of the story, and it does desperately need to have something done to it because of the crime rates in the area and the developments. Hopefully they will in future develop further. I still don't understand why you don't want to knock down Croftdale, but they're leaving the extensions on the back of those shops, which don't look very particularly heritage to me. Thank you.
Thanks. And then I had a final hand from Guy.
Very quick one, Chair. I feel like I'm being won over as the committee's views becoming clearer. I was wondering, it would be very helpful to me if the officers were to propose any conditions that they feel might allay any remaining concerns I might have, just so that the committee could bear those fully in mind as it comes to a final decision.
Do you want a moment to ponder what conditions you'd like to put on if it gets to that stage, which it may well do?
Councillor Stafford-Townsend, could I make hopefully a helpful suggestion? We had on DCA a similar situation where cross-party the members wanted to overturn the officer's refusal, and they proposed approval, but actually we delegated all the conditions for the officers to come up to, but to refer to you, or me in that case, to make sure you were happy when that was the case. Would that be helpful that way? Obviously, the issues about bream excellence, etc., and the other issues.
Thank you, Richard, for your unsolicited advice. Can you put your hand up in future, not just shout out, please? Thank you very much. I would like to let Jonathan answer Guy's question.
Thank you. Yeah, there are likely a number of conditions which we would look to impose, and I think we'll need some time just to consider what those are in relation to this proposal. But there are two elements just from kind of listening to the debate. I'm hearing about the BREEAM Excellent and the requirement there to condition that, and also in relation to materials as well, and the relationship with the neighbouring property there. And potentially conditioning kind of the submission of details to see kind of what can be achieved there in relation to the amenity issue. So those are two kind of specific things that I'm hearing from the debate that's taken place. Also, there is likely to be a need for a Section 106 agreement as well, I think, so we will also need to kind of go away and work on that.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? No, it doesn't.
No, it does very well. And if Fabian will excuse me for just a moment, I'd just say that from my point of view, I would want to give the officers the maximum discretion in determining it. But my concerns principally pertain to that sort of quantum of harm to the conservation area versus benefit to the community, and I want to give the officers the broadest possible discretion in those conditions. I think the suggestion from Councillor Eddy in terms of delegating the decision to officers, but with clarity from the chair as to what was meant by the committee, was an elegant one that may well alleviate my concerns further. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew did wave, and Fabian also waved at me. Okay, Fabian, go on then.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'd want to see the BREEAM Excellence conditioned, and I want to see the materials, particularly where light is an issue, conditioned as well. That would be great. I think that's about it. So I'm very pleased that officers noticed what we've said. I think we probably need to move to a vote, don't we?
So I'll take that you're proposing. Who would like to second officer recommendation? Okay, Richard. We'll do a roll call starting.
Right.
Over
So
here.
hang on a minute.
Again, through the chair. Don't just
Okay,
start
through the
shouting
chair.
out.
Okay, through you, Chair. Sorry. I understand. Somebody has to propose the officer recommendation, which I'm not prepared to. That's one way of doing it. Although sometimes you have a situation where nobody's prepared to propose it, and then we move on to the next.
Well, I'm
vote.
prepared to move the officer recommendation if somebody would like to second it. I was asking if anybody would propose it, and you started waving at me. So.
Oh, sorry.
Therefore,
sorry if I wasn't clear. Apologies,
okay, right. So I will move the officer recommendation. Who would like to second that? Richard, thank you very much. We'll take a roll call. Andrew, officer recommendation to reject.
Against.
Richard.
Against.
Guy.
Against.
Chris.
Against.
Katia.
Against.
Fabian.
Against.
I don't want to be mean to you, but against. Thank you very much. Okay, so would we like to move to a deferral or an approval? Put your hand up and then put your mic on so we can actually hear you. Mike.
Bearing in mind, we've already, like many applicants in the city, waited many years for this. And where we've got construction, inflation, other factors hammering applicants, could we actually formally, could I propose approval subject to the officer's delegated conditions to include the issues which actually Mr. Diamond's mentioned? Is that okay?
Before I take that proposal, I've got Andrew and Chris wanting... You're prepared to second it? Are you prepared to second? You're very excited. Okay, are you happy with that as a... Yeah. Do you want to say that or...?
Yeah. In terms of the in terms of the resolution, I think what we would seek is for that to be for the conditions and also for a section 106 as necessary.
Yeah, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Could I just ask a quick question, Chair, about the section 106? Could we use that to help fund the issue of making that Hepburn Road one way to make it safer? Oh, that's a still issue. Okay.
Philippa?
We can...
Oh, wait, can we just not all start shouting out because it starts to... Fabian, stop. Let Philippa answer your question, please.
Sorry. If the road safety audit identifies it as one way as a good safety, that will be covered under the regular section 278, and we'd have to advertise it for the change in traffic management. But everything that you've mentioned is possible within the existing section 278 works that would come.
Thank you. Okay, is everybody happy and understanding what we're voting on and the conditions and section 106? Okay, so who was moving that? Richard was moving it. Who was seconding it? I'm going to let Chris second it today. Okay, we'll do a roll call again. Andrew.
4.
Richard.
4.
Guy.
4.
Chris.
4.
Katya.
4.
Fabian.
4.
And 4 from me. Thank you very much. Okay. We'll have a slight pause so we can around before we move on to the next item. Does anybody need to run and use the toilet really quickly?
Yeah, Chair, could I request a comfort break for about 5 or 10 minutes? Thank you.
I think we're all back now. Okay. Are we ready to go? Right. Good. Thanks. Okay, are we ready to go on Hartcliffe Way? There's no public forum for this exciting agenda item, so we will move straight to the officer presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, members. This won't be very long. This is for an extension of the opening hours to the existing Hartcliffe Way tip refuse centre that was given consent. Sorry, that's the old-fashioned way.
Strike that from the record.
Reuse and recycling centre on Hartcliffe Way. Just to reflect on where it is, I'm sure you all know it is. It's on Hartcliffe Way, and it's that obviously within the red line there. The amendments to the opening hours, or the hours of operation, I should say, is to increase it from 6 till 8 in the morning. Currently, it operates for the public from 8 till 7 every day. But the operator wishes to open it earlier, and that's to allow street cleansing staff to collect their vehicles, because they're now based at Hartcliffe Way, and then they go off across the city. And then from sort of 6 till 7 to also allow the staff to enter the site and get it ready for public use. There would be no public on the site between those hours. Just quickly, to sort of set out what consultation we did. We sent quite a few letters out, given it's in a bowl, and there's quite a few residents that live in and around that can see or would be impacted by the site. But we only received 5 objections in relation to noise and traffic impacts, and the suitability of the noise assessment that was actually submitted with the application. Our pollution control officer did have concerns with the suitability of the noise assessment that was submitted initially, and that was because it didn't really cover the reality of what the noises would be on the site. So we asked them to actually assess that during those hours. As a result of that, we did a reconsultation, and then there was one objection received on noise grounds after that. I will draw your attention to the amendment sheet. You will have seen that there was an additional objection from the same person who objected on the reconsultation, and I won't go through the amendment sheet because there's quite a lot of information on there, but you would have seen that we've addressed that. Those issues. Just quickly then, I'm not sure you can really see that, but it's on your presentations. So between 6 and 7 is really only the operators of the street cleansing vehicles would just be coming to the site, getting in and driving off, and other operational vehicles would be just started up and taken off. That's between the most sensitive hour, between 6 and 7. And then between 7 and 8, slightly more activity would be happening, but not obviously the transition of the public coming to the site and dumping their waste. So overall, the pollution control officer is happy that whilst there might be audible noises during those hours, it's not going to be of a level that would be harmful to residents. And again, that's detailed within your, I'm not going to go into the DBs and all of that, that's in your, it's in the report. In order to ensure, though, that the public aren't harmed by any noises during those more sensitive times, we asked the applicant to set out a noise management plan, which they did, and you've got a copy of that within your packs. Again, the pollution control officer was happy that that would adequately cover any issues of noise if they arose from complaints. And then we've reworded the condition, that covered the operational hours, as you can see, as in bold there, and to ensure that the operation would be in accordance with the extension of operating hours management plan. And then just quickly, the application also wanted to just do some minor changes to the site layout. Again, it was things like the office building that we'd already allowed moved further south slightly, some access ramps to increase the accessibility of the workspace, and then, as you can see on the list there, other minor changes for things that were actually approved on the site, but just shifting around the site, and we didn't consider that would cause any more visual harm than we'd already given permission for a few years ago. So essentially, we've concluded that there isn't any demonstrable harm for this application, and the officer recommendation is for approval.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions about this? Andrew?
Yeah, just a quick couple. One is, I've just happened to note that on the plan for the hour between 7 and 8, it very specifically says that the bulk haulage that will be loaded out in that time frame is the green waste, black bag and wood. But obviously this site deals with a whole host of other things. Is that because those things are eminently less noisy than metal, for example?
Yeah, that within the noise management, the noise assessment, the more noisier operations would be after those more sensitive hours. It's just simply the applicant has simply stated it would be those things in the table that they would be operating at that time. Anything else shouldn't be, and that's why the management plan has been conditioned and asked for. If it turned out that they did do it, then there is provisions for complaint within that management plan, but also there's also measures to assess whether that would be acceptable or not, or to rectify where it shouldn't have happened, basically. So, yeah, they've said that's the only things. Metal, they're not going to move at that point. But if they do and it causes noise, then residents have got recourse to complain, and we have got recourse as the planning authority or the enforcement authority to look into that and to stop that.
Thank you. And then I just had a question over the various sort of movements of buildings and structures on the site. It would have been quite nice to have had a sort of compare and contrast chart, because I find that I'm not very good with directions. But more specifically, in the I don't know if this is a typo or whether it's just retrospective, but one of the items on page 108, it says the firewater tank has been moved from the northwest of the site to a location south of the perimeter road. So has that actually already happened, and we're just approving it retrospectively?
Unfortunately, yes.
Naughty. Any other questions? No? Okay, let's move to the debate. Very well spotted, Andrew, as always. Does anybody have anything that they would like to say? Richard, if you could keep it succinct, I think we'd all be very grateful.
I will be very succinct. The recycling centre butts my wall. I live 600 yards away. Been there about 8 times since it's open, and it's wonderful and well run, thank you. Since that time, I've had 0 actually noise complaints and no contact about this consultation, so I'm comfortable with it. I think it's reasonable and proportionate. I'll be voting for it.
I'll take Andrew and then Chris.
So, yeah, I'll be supporting this as well. I think it's reasonable, it's measured, it's it's thought through. I do understand residents' concerns, though, having lived up the hill from when I lived in Totterdown, I lived up the hill from the recycling centre in Albert Road, and the noise from that, which is a different proposition, obviously, was could sometimes be quite disruptive. So I understand where residents or objectors are coming from, but I think that those objections are mitigated by the actual nature of what we're actually going to prove.
Chris?
Yeah, I'll be obviously, it's in my ward of Philwood. I've got friends who live behind it on Nova's Hill. None of them have come to me with any issues with noise, so I think it's going to be fine with just the vehicles moving in and out, because Hartcliffe Way at that time of the day is very busy anyway, so I'll be approving it. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Shall we move to the officer recommendation if no one's got anything else to say? Guy? No, we'll do officer recommendation. Who would like to second it? You. Who hasn't seconded something today? Andrew and he did read the papers very well, so he does get that as a reward. Okay, so I will start with Andrew. Officer recommendation to approve.
4.
Richard.
4.
Guy.
4.
Chris.
4.
Katia.
4.
Fabian.
4.
And 4 from me as well. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for bringing it to us. Wow.